Vanishing Point. The disappearance of Lars Mittank. A young man in a yellow t-shirt steps out of a taxi at a Bulgarian airport, picks up his suitcase, and walks calmly through the departures hall. He looks like any other tourist heading home after a week in the sun. Then, without warning, he turns, bursts back out through the terminal doors, and starts running. Not jogging, not hurrying, but sprinting, full speed across an open parking lot, as if his life depends on it. He vaults an 8-foot barbed wire fence without breaking stride. He keeps running, past the edge of the tarmac, into a field, and then into a line of trees beyond it. He leaves behind his suitcase, his wallet, his passport, his phone, every object that could prove who he was or help anyone find him again. That was the last anyone ever saw of Lars Mittank. It happened on July 8th, 2014, and in the years since, the security footage of those final 60 seconds has been watched by tens of millions of people, turning a 28-year-old power plant technician from a small town in northern Germany into what internet true crime communities have literally nicknamed the most famous missing person on YouTube. And yet, for all those millions of views, for all the theories, the tabloid headlines, and the annual anniversary specials on German television, nobody has ever been able to explain with any certainty what he was running from or where he went. Welcome to Vanishing Point. Who was Lars Mittank? Lars Joachim Mittank was born on February 9, 1986, in Berlin. He grew up and stayed in Itzehoe, a small town in the northern German state of Schleswig-Holstein, later living nearby in the town of Marna. By most accounts, his life was steady and unremarkable in the best possible way.
He trained as a technician and worked at a power plant near Wilhelmshaven, home to Germany's largest naval base and its principal deep-water port. He had a long-term girlfriend. He had a tight circle of close friends going back to his school years. He was an only child, and by his mother Sandra's own description, the two of them shared an especially close bond, one that had only deepened after his father suffered a stroke, since Lars had taken to helping out at his parents' house regularly afterward. He was, by every account collected from people who actually knew him, completely ordinary in the best sense of the word. Cheerful, athletic, reliable, with no history of mental illness, no substance abuse issues, and no reason for anyone who loved him to worry about him. In late June of 2014, Lars and 4 close friends booked a week-long all-inclusive getaway to Golden Sands, a beach resort just outside the Bulgarian city of Varna on the Black Sea coast. It was, notably, the very first time in his 28 years that Lars had ever left Germany. Golden Sands has a reputation as something like the Bulgarian answer to Ibiza. Cheap, all-inclusive package deals, a party strip packed with clubs and bars, and a summer population made up almost entirely of young European tourists looking for sun, alcohol, and nightlife on a budget. For the first 5 days of the trip, by every account, that's exactly what Lars and his friends got. One friend, Paul Roman, would later describe the week on German television as having flown by. Swimming, sunbathing, casual football matches, nights out, clubbing. Lars, by his account, was relaxed and in good spirits the entire time. Another friend, Tim Schult, did note one small oddity. Lars wasn't eating much, sticking mostly to small portions of soup or salad rather than full meals.
It's a minor detail on its own, but it's one of the very few pieces of before behavior anyone has ever flagged as slightly unusual. And, in hindsight, people have wondered whether it meant anything at all. The bar fight. Everything changed on the group's second-to-last night, July 6, 2014, at a bar in town packed, like every bar in Europe that week, with people watching the World Cup semifinals. Lars was a supporter of SV Werder Bremen. At some point that evening, he found himself in a heated disagreement with a separate group of German tourists. Not about anything political, not about money, just football. Specifically, whether Werder Bremen or Bayern Munich was the better club. It's the kind of argument that happens in bars across Germany every single weekend, usually forgotten by morning. At some point that night, Lars split off from his friends. Different accounts place this differently. Some say it happened as the group was leaving a McDonald's after the bar. Others simply say he went his own way after last call. Either way, his friends didn't see him again that night. He didn't come back to the resort with them. The next morning, Lars turned up again and told his friends he'd been jumped and beaten by 4 men. Here, the accounts start to genuinely diverge, which is worth sitting with for a second, because it tells you something about how murky this case gets, even in its earliest hours. Some friends told police the assailants were the same men Lars had argued with in the bar. Others said Lars told them it wasn't those men directly, but local men hired by that group specifically to rough him up. Whichever version is accurate, and it's entirely possible Lars himself gave slightly different versions to different friends, the physical result wasn't in dispute. He came back with an injured jaw and a ruptured eardrum.
He saw a local doctor who examined the injuries, advised him that flying home the next day with a damaged eardrum could be dangerous given the pressure changes involved, and prescribed him an antibiotic called cefprozil, a 500 mg cephalosporin, presumably as a precaution against infection. His friends, understandably rattled by what had happened to him, offered to change their own flights and stay in Bulgaria with him until he recovered. Lars refused. He insisted he'd be fine, told them to stick to the original plan, and sent them home to Germany on July 7th, as scheduled. It was the last time any of them would ever see him.
Alone in Bulgaria. With his friends gone, and his own flight rebooked for the following day, Lars checked out of the resort at the same time they did, but rather than staying anywhere near Golden Sands, he ended up booking a room at a place called Hotel Color, a cheap, no-frills hotel closer to Varna Airport, in a rougher, less touristy part of the area. Reports suggest this wasn't entirely by choice. It was peak summer season, and with his friend's original resort fully booked, a budget hotel near the airport may simply have been what was available on short notice. Whatever the reason, it marks the exact point where things start to unravel. According to virtually every account collected since, it was roughly a day after his friends flew home, so sometime on July 7th, that Lars's behavior changed dramatically. He called his mother, Sandra, back in Germany. He was whispering. He told her he believed people were trying to rob him or kill him, and asked her urgently to cancel his credit cards, because he was convinced someone had cloned them after he'd checked into the new hotel. Over the following hours, Sandra and Lars spoke multiple times, by phone and by text. She would later describe him as sounding deeply worried, deeply paranoid, but still coherent, still recognizably himself in how he communicated, even as the content of what he was saying became increasingly alarming. At one point, he told her he was being followed by 4 men. At another point, he raised a strange, specific concern, that someone was tampering with him through his medication, or some other outside influence he couldn't quite name. The Hotel Color's own security cameras captured exactly the kind of behavior you'd expect from someone in that state of mind. Footage shows Lars pacing up and down the hallways for no apparent reason, looking out of windows repeatedly, as if watching for someone below. At one point, hiding inside the hotel's elevator, seemingly to avoid being seen. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, he left the hotel entirely, on foot, alone, and didn't return for roughly an hour. Nobody has ever established where he went during that missing hour, or why. By morning, he called Sandra again, telling her that whoever he believed was pursuing him seemed to be getting closer. Despite all of this, despite a night of documented paranoia, of hallway pacing, of secretive phone calls asking his mother to protect his finances from people he couldn't name, Lars still intended to fly home as planned. He'd bought his ticket. Whatever was terrifying him, in his own mind, going home to Germany was still the plan that would end it. The airport. On the morning of July 8, 2014, Lars took a taxi to Varna Airport. Before flying, he needed medical clearance related to his ear injury from the beating days earlier, so he went to see the airport's on-site doctor, a man named Kosta Kostov. By Dr. Kostov's own later account, Lars appeared nervous and on edge throughout the consultation, noticeably more unsettled than a routine pre-flight checkup would call for. He asked the doctor pointed questions about the antibiotic he'd been prescribed after the bar fight, whether it could be affecting him, whether something about it wasn't right. Kostov told him the medication was fine and that he was cleared to fly. Lars didn't leave the office. He stayed, still visibly anxious, still circling the subject of his medication, and then, according to Kostov, a construction worker walked into the room. The airport was undergoing renovations at the time, so workers moving in and out of offices wasn't unusual. But for Lars, in that moment, it was apparently the final trigger. Kostov described him beginning to tremble. Then Lars stood up and shouted, in what's become the single most quoted line in the entire case, that he didn't want to die there, and that he had to get out. He then bolted from the doctor's office and out into the terminal. Airport security cameras picked him up from there, walking briskly at first, then breaking into a dead run, sprinting out through the terminal's exit doors, across the car park, and straight at the airport's perimeter fence. He climbed it in one motion without slowing down and kept running, across an open field and into a wooded area beyond the airport grounds. He left every single one of his belongings behind at the airport: his suitcase, his wallet, his passport, his mobile phone. In an instant, a man walked away from every form of identification, every method of contact, and every piece of currency he had, and ran, on foot, into unfamiliar Bulgarian countryside he had never set foot in before in his life. That footage, roughly a minute of grainy, wide-angle security camera video, is the last confirmed visual record of Lars Mittank that exists anywhere. He has not been seen, credibly, by anyone since. The search, Bulgarian police once alerted, launched a search of the fields and wooded terrain immediately surrounding the airport, the same ground the security footage showed Lars running into. Officers, local volunteers, and organized search teams combed through the area on foot. Tracking dogs were brought in, and reportedly did pick up a scent trail leading away from the terminal, suggesting Lars had, in fact, kept moving deeper into the landscape after he vanished from camera view. But the trail went cold, and no further physical trace turned up. Search efforts eventually widened well beyond the immediate area. Construction sites, abandoned buildings, and stretches of coastline nearby were all checked. Hospitals and clinics across the region were contacted directly, in case an unidentified patient matching his description had turned up anywhere. Nothing. No clothing, no phone activity of any kind. His phone, left behind at the airport, obviously generated no new signal after that morning. No credible witness account placing him anywhere at any point after he disappeared into that tree line. With Bulgarian and German police both unable to make headway, Sandra Mittank made the decision, roughly a month after her son vanished, to hire a private investigator, a German named Andreas Gutik. Gutik, by multiple accounts, threw himself into the case seriously. He reportedly re-watched the airport security footage repeatedly, checking for any detail investigators might have missed, and found nothing new. He contacted hospitals and homeless shelters across the region directly, on the theory that Lars, without any identification on him, could have ended up as an unidentified patient somewhere. That search also came back empty. He traveled to Varna himself and personally distributed missing person flyers around the city and surrounding area, describing Lars's height, his build, his blonde hair, his brown eyes. Nobody who saw those flyers ever came forward with anything that led anywhere. What might have happened? In the absence of a body, a confirmed sighting, or any hard physical evidence at all, the explanations that have circulated around this case over the past decade fall into a handful of broad categories, and none of them has ever been proven or fully ruled out. The first, and probably the most clinically straightforward, is some form of acute psychiatric episode, a psychotic break essentially, triggered either by the head trauma he sustained during the beating, by an undiagnosed underlying condition like schizophrenia that the injury may have activated, or by a combination of severe stress, sleep deprivation, and physical trauma compounding on each other over just a few days. Medical professionals who've weighed in on the case have noted that injury-triggered psychosis is a real, documented phenomenon, and that its onset and severity can vary significantly from case to case. Under this theory, Lars ran into the countryside in a state of genuine terror driven by his own mind, and either died from exposure, dehydration, or misadventure in unfamiliar terrain, or is alive somewhere, potentially with no clear memory of who he is or how he got there. The second theory centers on the antibiotic he was prescribed, cefprozil.
His mother, along with some Bulgarian and German doctors who've reviewed the case, have pointed to documented, if rare, psychiatric side effects associated with that class of antibiotic, including hallucinations and paranoia. It's a tidy explanation, medically speaking. There's just one significant problem with it. Dr. Kostov, the same airport physician who examined Lars on the day he disappeared, has stated clearly that Lars never actually filled that prescription in the first place, and by Kostov's account, never took a single dose of the medication he was supposedly reacting to. A third category of theory is far darker and leans heavily on Bulgaria's reputation, fair or not, as a country with elevated rates of human trafficking within the European Union. Under these theories, Lars didn't run in blind panic at all. He ran because he had genuinely become entangled in something criminal. Whether that meant drug smuggling, an unpaid debt to dangerous people, or having witnessed something he shouldn't have. Some particularly grim versions of this theory speculate that the original bar fight wasn't a random dispute over football at all, but a deliberate provocation, and that everything that followed, the paranoia, the hotel behavior, the airport panic, was Lars genuinely, correctly, being hunted by people with real intent to harm him. German and Bulgarian authorities have both stated on the record that they found no evidence connecting Lars to any criminal organization or trafficking network. But an absence of evidence in a case with this little physical evidence of anything hasn't stopped the theory from persisting. A fourth possibility, quieter and less dramatic than the rest, is that Lars simply chose to disappear. That for reasons known only to him, he used the chaos and fear of that week as cover to walk away from his old life entirely, and has spent the past decade deliberately staying hidden. Investigators who've looked closely at this case have generally found this one hard to square with what's known about him. A man close to his parents, devoted enough to his father's recovery to help out regularly after his stroke, with no history of wanting to escape his own life. It doesn't fit. But in a case with no answers at all, doesn't fit isn't the same as impossible. Could he have survived? One detail that keeps coming up, especially among people trying to argue for the survival theories, is that Lars had genuine experience with hunting, fishing, and trapping back home in Germany. Skills that, in theory, could help someone survive off the land if they had to. But people who've examined the case in detail have generally pushed back hard on this idea. For a simple reason. The area surrounding Varna Airport in July isn't forgiving countryside. It's hot, often brutally so in the height of a Bulgarian summer, and the terrain doesn't offer much in the way of reliable food or water for someone moving through it with nothing but the clothes on his back. Surviving there for any real stretch of time, most experts who've weighed in agree, would have been extraordinarily difficult, though, notably, not something anyone has ever definitively ruled out either, given that no remains have ever been recovered. Reported sightings. Over the decade plus since Lars vanished, a steady trickle of reported sightings has surfaced. Enough to keep hope alive in some corners, but never enough to actually resolve anything. About a year after his disappearance, a truck driver in the Varna area reported believing he'd seen Lars hitchhiking along a local road. Police were never able to substantiate the claim. A witness separately claimed to have spotted a man matching his description living among Varna's homeless population. Again, never confirmed. Other reported sightings placed a man resembling Lars in Germany and in Poland at various points over the years. None of these produced anything that investigators considered credible enough to act on. The most widely reported of all these tips came in 2019, when a German truck driver stated he had picked up a hitchhiker matching an aged-up version of Lars's appearance and driven him from Dresden to a small town called Schildov in the Oberhavel district of Brandenburg. The story got enough traction that it prompted renewed public appeals on German television, urging anyone with more information to come forward. As with every other lead in this case, it went nowhere conclusive. There was also, further back, a reported sighting in Brazil in 2016, which turned out to be a case of mistaken identity once investigators tracked down and identified the man in question, who was not Lars at all. The most famous missing person on YouTube. What sets this case apart from the vast majority of unresolved European disappearances isn't the mystery itself exactly. It's what happened to that 1 minute of airport security footage after it was made public. Over the years, that clip has been re-uploaded, compiled, and recirculated across countless true crime and unexplained mysteries videos on YouTube, racking up tens of millions of combined views. It routinely appears in list-style videos with titles built for clicks. Compilations of unexplained disappearances, mysterious CCTV footage, and strange unsolved cases. And Lars's clip is frequently cited as one of the most viewed individual segments across several of these videos. That level of sustained viral attention is exactly what earned him the nickname used again and again in headlines and forum threads: the most famous missing person on YouTube. It's a strange, uncomfortable kind of fame. In the comment sections beneath these videos, theories multiply endlessly. That he staged his own disappearance, that he'd swallowed drugs as part of a smuggling attempt and panicked, that he'd overdosed somewhere out of sight, that something far worse had been done to him. None of it is evidence. All of it is speculation, generated and endlessly reshared by an internet audience with no actual connection to the case, filling the vacuum left by a decade of silence. For his family, that fame has been a genuinely double-edged thing. On one hand, it's kept his case visible in a way most missing persons cases never achieve. A Facebook page dedicated to finding him, Findet Lars Mittank, has drawn tens of thousands of followers over the years, all sharing updates, tips, and appeals for information. On the other hand, it means Sandra Mittank has had to watch her son's worst, most frightened moment turned into internet entertainment, replayed millions of times by strangers treating it as a spooky curiosity rather than the final image of someone's missing child. Where the case stands today. More than a decade later, Lars Mittank remains classified as missing by both German and Bulgarian authorities. No body has ever been recovered. No confirmed sighting has ever surfaced. No definitive cause has ever been established for what triggered his final, desperate sprint out of that airport terminal.
Sandra Mittank has continued to speak publicly about her son over the years, keeping his case in front of German media whenever the opportunity arises, in the hope that renewed visibility might eventually shake loose the one piece of information that finally explains what happened. She has, at various points, expressed a belief that he may still be alive, potentially even without any memory of who he is or how he came to be wherever he is. It's the kind of hope a parent holds on to specifically because the alternative is unbearable, and because, in a case this thin on facts, nobody, not the police, not the private investigator, not Lars's own mother, has ever been handed enough evidence to close that door for good. Closing. What makes this case linger more than a decade on isn't just the mystery of where Lars Mittank ended up, it's the speed of his unraveling. A completely ordinary man with a completely ordinary life, whose final week alive, or at least his final week as anyone knew him, spiraled from a bar argument about football into whispered phone calls about assassins and cloned credit cards, and finally into a full sprint over an airport fence into unfamiliar countryside, all in the space of roughly 48 hours. We know almost nothing about what happened to him after that fence. We know a great deal, in painstaking second-by-second detail, about the fear on his face in the moments before he vanished, because millions of strangers have watched it, on their phones, on their laptops, in list videos with clickbait titles, treating a man's very last moments as content. Somewhere between a bar fight over football and a sprint into the Bulgarian countryside, Lars Mittank disappeared. And more than a decade later, nobody, anywhere, has ever been able to say for certain what happened to him. If this case affected you the way it affected our team putting it together, let us know in the comments, and consider subscribing to Vanishing Point for more of the cases that stay unsolved long after the headlines fade. Until next time, stay safe, and thank you for watching.